Big time fight coming up this weekend. We have two really good fighters at 135 pounds duking it out, and one coming in on short notice. Andre Ewell out of his planned bout with Cody Stamann. There was a positive COVID test and a few negatives, but due to the UFC's rules that are in place, Andre Ewell is now out of this fight. And in steps a prospect that you and I know have been very familiar with, and I think a lot of MMA fans are going to be really excited about him. I'm talking about Askar Askar. His nickname's AK-47. Start the comps, Matt. I mean, we had Andre Kirilenko, Utah Jazz, Brooklyn Nets legend in his final season. I loved Andre Kirilenko.
Who didn't?
If we look, wow, exactly. If we look at Askar Askar, I went back, did a deep dive on his career. And like I said, we were familiar with him maybe more from his loss than his wins. But at the time, he was 10-0 going into his fight against Said Yakub Kakrakhmanov. A lot of people are familiar with Kakrakhmanov from his fight with Umar Nurmagomedov, the one off the PFL. And while Kakrakhmanov lost that fight, he looked pretty darn good in it. He goes out there and fights Askar Askar, and he knocks him out in the first round. And it was one of those ones where we saw a few defensive lapses from Askar Askar, who's known primarily as a striker. But the one thing that I've noticed from him, he trains out of a great gym in Chicago or in the area, coming out of Schaumburg, Illinois. It is Midwest Training Center. Training is wrestling with Todd Higgins, but his coach, Alex Trujillo, you can hear him in the corner really shouting out a lot of great instructions. And we've heard this throughout the pandemic where, corners really get to have a say in the fight. Announcers can too. Just ask Daniel Cormier and fighters who hear Daniel Cormier during the fights. But Alex Trujillo really shouting great instructions to his pupil. And you can see that Askar Askar really takes those to heart, really listens into what his coach has to say. I know, and this is going to sound weird, but I know Pat Miletich in Askar's last fight in the main event with LFA really took note of that during the broadcast. But Askar Askar, like I said, he's known as a striker, throws a lot more single shots with power than he does, combinations. And he doesn't really have maybe the most crisp of boxing, but he does use a jab. He will pump that out there. The one thing that I really like that he underutilizes are his leg kicks.
Oh, yeah. And Askar Askar, the knockout loss that you had brought up, it's really important because that loss just really exposed an issue that's always been there. Like, you go back and you watch his past fights, he's always been a fairly hittable fighter. It's just that was the one time he went down from the big shot. Now, the great news is Cody Stamann's not out here finishing guys left, right, and center. And this should be a good introduction for Askar Askar to the UFC crowd, because when you think about it, this fight really, it reminds me a lot of when Arman Tsarukyan fought Matt Frevola the other week. You had him, he was supposed to fight a primary striker, Nasrat Haqparast, similar to Cody Stamann with Andre Ewell. And now his game plan, it's going to be different, but now he's fighting a guy who will welcome the grappling exchanges with him a little bit more. So it should make for a more competitive fight, although it's a less dangerous fight overall, because for all the great things Askar Askar brings to the table, he has good power, but I don't think he has the great power necessary to really hurt a guy like Cody Stamann and really get his respect to the point where he won't be trying to close that distance to go for the takedown. Because when Cody Stamann's at his best, yes, he will throw combinations on the feet, but all that volume is really just to set up the takedowns. Askar Askar, if he is able to get those leg kicks going early, it will be interesting, because for Cody Stamann, we have seen him start to tire. He's one of those guys who he's such a good wrestler, and he's always getting those takedowns that he can tire as the fight progresses, just because he's so good at wrestling, really. But if he is starting to tire, if he is eating a lot of leg kicks, how will this fight look in the third round?
That's the thing that I kind of worry about in this one. And I also look at Askar Askar's record. And listen, we'll kind of parry the positive with the negative here. I look at the finishes. He beats Jake Lamb, former All-Star for the Arizona Diamondbacks. No, it's not that Jake Lamb. But he finishes him, knocks him out in his first fight. Then he has a decision against Brandon Emmons, who was 1-0 at the time. He has a verbal, punch or submission due to punches against Chris Johnson, who was 1-5. He knocks out Andrew Moreno, 1-4. He knocks out Sergio Pavon, who's 1-0. He has a decision against James Blair, 5-0. He finishes Jesse Parker, 1-1. His next finish win isn't until Alberto Martinez back in 2019. I went back and watched that fight because the first round rear naked choke. And if you watch it, Martinez is lighting him up on the feet, and he's super cocky, starting to really move around in the cage. I remember the commentary even says, "Oh, it looks like Askar didn't even plan for a southpaw in this one. That's what a striking defense looks like." And then eventually, you have Martinez. Just again, he's so cocky, he gets up against the ropes because island fights. It's like we're fighting in Pride. and he gets him up against the ropes. And then all of a sudden, Askar just takes him down, grabs the back, and chokes him out in like 30 seconds. So you can tell that Askar Askar, A, his wrestling has continued to get better. B, his jiu-jitsu has continued to get better. And he's one of those guys that I think it's really come together in MMA. He's not obviously a pure wrestler like Cody Stamann, but I've seen in fights like the Dennis Dombrow fight where Dombrow, they talk about it. I think, what was it, 8 or 9 of his 10 pro wins were all by submission. And you can see when he goes for a takedown, Askar stuffs the head to push him down, extends his legs, and he really has, fluid takedown defense. When he gets on top, as his fights have progressed, he's really looked to kind of move position. I know in that fight against Dombrow, both guys ended up getting tired. It was a 5-round main event with HFC. You find that one on Fight TV. And really, Askar gets clipped early. Askar clips him pretty early. And again, like you said, that's kind of the story for some of his fights. I know if you go back and you watch the last fight, I had it scored 30-27 for Askar Askar when he took on Kevin Worth, who was 8-1 at the LFA 92 main event. And that was back in October. But again, the trouble that I had in that one, he rocks Worth early, he gets him down, but he is incredibly liable to looping shots, which is really strange. You and I talk about that all the time, that, normally technique beats the looping power shots, but Askar seems to be susceptible to the power shots, but he can see the straight shots coming. It's really weird.
It is, and I think this is why this is a great introductory fight to the UFC crowd for Askar Askar. He's fighting a guy who is ranked, who's going to grapple him. And listen, let's be honest. I think we give the prediction right now. Cody Stamann's going to win a unanimous decision. But the way I look at this fight is, if Askar Askar can make Cody Stamann work in positions that you don't normally see Cody Stamann work, that's kind of a win. And I know that's a very Robin Black answer to making this prediction, but if he doesn't just give up the takedown constantly, if he can shut down some of those takedowns early, really work in his kicks and let his hands go, I'm looking more for a confident Askar Askar who will let his hands go a little bit more in this fight. Because I hate to say you have nothing to lose, but you really have nothing to lose. Like, you're fighting a ranked fighter. So if you lose, it's not that big of a deal. And the fighter who you're fighting, it's not like he's out there fighting Piotr Jan, who could really, really hurt you on the feet by any means. Like, Cody Stamann's not a big finisher. He might get a rear naked choke or something on the ground, but more likely than not, he's going to take you down a bunch, make you really tired, and it's going to go to the judges' scorecard. So I think this is honestly a perfect fight for him to join the UFC on.
And really, we've seen a lot of these short notice debuts, or a lot of fighters debuting where, maybe they have the regional talent and they should have been booked with somebody else from the regional scene coming into the UFC. Like, again, we talk about it so much, but Manon Fiorot, when she took on Leonardo, it made a lot of sense to mash those two up. Then you look at Ricky Simone and he fights Gaetano Pirello. Well, what happens? Exactly what you thought would happen. So it's always tricky, especially with a guy like Simone that's been in and around the top 15 for a while now. So you look at Cody Stamann, he's a ranked fighter. If you're Askar Askar, you're exactly right. I mean, if Stamann takes him down and lays on top of him, well, he didn't learn a whole lot from Askar Askar. And from Cody Stamann, the same can be said, right? I mean, nobody really wants to take a fight with Cody Stamann because you know exactly what the blueprint's going to be. And he's just so good at wrestling that he out-wrestles just about anybody. So it'll be tricky to see kind of what happens or how this one plays out. Maybe there's an opportunity for Askar to get a submission off his back, like we talked about that with Andre Ewell. Maybe he can clip Cody Stamann coming in. The thing that he does, Askar Askar, that is, that we've seen work for some fighters recently, and I'm talking about Chaos Williams, he will plant and he will throw his arms into his punches. And when you see guys throwing their whole arm into a hook, not often does it work because most people have the footwork to defend against it, but Alex Morono didn't, and Abdulrazak Al-Hassan didn't, and it worked out for Chaos Williams. So Askar Askar has some shots like that where he throws his whole entire arm into his hook, and he lands flush with his fist, and he's able to really wobble guys. So it'll be interesting to see how it works out. I'm just going to bring up the Topology votes really quick, Matt, so we can get an idea of where people are at. 421 total votes, 88% Stamann, 87 by decision. We don't have odds on this one. The fight was just announced today on Tuesday. But yeah, I'm in total agreement. I've got Cody Stamann in this fight. I think it's great to have Askar Askar in the UFC. It's great to have a fighter representing Palestine in the UFC. He was born there, grew up and trains in Chicago. And great to see more fighters representing the Midwest Training Center as well. I know Clay Guida's brother, he used to go there. So that's pretty cool, right? And Clay Guida's on this card. So it all comes full circle. But Matt, really looking forward to this card. We had the video come out late on Devonte Smith, who's taking on Justin Jaynes. And Matt, as an aside, I had the opportunity to go on Ryan Jarrell's show from good old Bangor, Maine. And we talked about the entire card. He just interviewed Justin Jaynes, who said that he wants to go in there and knock Devonte Smith's block off. So my pick is 110% changing to Devonte Smith. I'll say that even in this video now. If Justin Jaynes is going to wrestle, I said it in the Smith video, he's going to win. He's going in there talking about trying to knock out Devonte Smith, not a snowball's chance and HE double hockey sticks. But that's a conversation for another time. We'll talk about that as well on Question Mark Kicks, which is 2 hours before the prelims on Saturday. Matt, I'm loving this card and a great opportunity, like we said, for Askar Askar.
Oh, yeah.
So as we always say, Matt, with Fight Night picks, let's get into it.